How's it going, everyone? It's Harvey from Weather Sponge 5000, and in this video we're going to focus on Major Hurricane Ian, which is expected to make landfall as a major hurricane around the southwestern coast of Florida, and will determine the impacts the state of Florida should experience, and the states a little bit further northward as well, such as Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and determine if we could see any major changes regarding the strength and track of Hurricane Ian as it makes landfall on the Florida coast. But before I begin, make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather-related content. So let's begin by taking a look at Hurricane Ian, the water vapor imagery for Hurricane Ian as of right now, and we do see that there's a heavy amount of convection now going on around center circulation. However, despite this, we haven't seen a very well-defined eye just yet, as right now this storm is going through an eye wall replacement cycle, which is the reason why over the past several hours the wind speed hasn't really been going up, since this storm is undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle, which typically does put a limit to strengthening during an eye wall replacement cycle. However, once a fully well-developed eye wall does begin to form, where the outer eye wall begins to overtake the inner eye wall and begins to really expand the eye, then we should see this storm begin to intensify in wind speed once again, and potentially could intensify into a category 4. Right now it's a category 3 at 120 miles per hour, but it's still very well possible we could see a 130 to 140 mile per hour storm on our hands, making landfall around the Fort Myers metropolitan area once this storm undergoes its eye wall replacement cycle to really develop a well-defined enough eye wall for the wind speeds to increase, which is definitely very concerning. However, whether this is a category 4, whether this is a category 3, you still should expect extreme impacts along the southwestern coast of Florida, and even further northward as well, and more inland into Florida, where you should expect close to, if not over 20 inches of rain in some areas, as well as a heavy amount of wind and storm surge all along the coast, even the eastern coast of Florida. So if I were to show you guys the radar for Hurricane Ian, we do see the heavy rain now over the northern eye wall of this storm, and we're now seeing the outer bands approach Florida at this time. We do have some thunderstorm activity moving through West Palm Beach at this time, and now we're seeing the thunderstorm activity move into Cape Coral, Florida, and eventually we should see that rain move a little bit further northward into Tampa, Orlando over the next several hours. And we do see that while Key West is dry at this time, you are experiencing very strong winds, where you've been reporting wind gusts over 60 miles per hour, and I wouldn't be surprised if there have been wind gusts reported over 70 miles per hour all throughout the Keys, as the eye wall is relatively close to you guys to bring those stronger gusts towards the Keys, and this rain is expected to continue to move northward, and unfortunately the storm will move very slowly over the next several days, which will allow for the rainfall, the totals, to be much higher than they would be if Hurricane Ian was just moving at an average pace for a tropical cyclone. And the reason why the storm is going to move so slowly, because like I said, the upper level winds and the lower level winds are going opposite directions, trying to steer this storm towards a certain direction opposite of each other. And since there's just two strong currents pretty much pulling on Hurricane Ian, then that's going to slow the storm down, because there's going to be a lack of a strong steering current that's going to steer the storm towards one direction at a very fast pace, because we have the lower level winds trying to steer this towards the west, while the upper level winds are trying to steer this towards the east, which is the reason why it's expected to move slowly over the next several days, because we do see in the upper levels, right where the air pressure is around 200 millibars, we see that the winds are coming from the west, and while along the surface winds are coming from the southwest, stuff from the northeast, as a result of this ridge over northern Texas, trying to steer it towards the west. So it's going to move very slowly, which is very unfortunate, because that will make the duration of impacts a lot longer for the state of Florida, and that will bring more significant impacts as a result, since the duration of the impacts associated with the storm will be a lot longer than if this storm were to move at an average pace. But in terms of the exact track and strength of the storm, pretty much it's inevitable at this point. This will make landfall, I'd say, somewhere between Fort Myers and Tampa. This is pretty much where all the where the main computer models are leaning towards at this point. It's unlikely. It's pretty much impossible at this point. This will take a track further northward into the Florida Panhandle. It was still a little bit uncertain yesterday, but now it's pretty certain at this point. This will make landfall somewhere between Fort Myers and Tampa. So if you live right within this zone between Fort Myers and the Tampa Bay area, you should expect major hurricane-like impacts, and you need to pay very close attention to the radar over the next several hours to really see where that eye will move, because depending on where that eye moves, that will play a big role in terms of the storm surge you receive, as well as the maximum wind speed you'll receive. Because of course, if you're in the track where the eye wall is going to move over you guys, and you should expect over 100-mile-per-hour wind gusts, which could cause extensive catastrophic damage to your neighborhood. So you need to prepare throughout the coast of Florida. I'm assuming at this point you should already be prepared, considering that the eye is only around 12 hours away from making landfall. So make sure to just hunker down, stay indoors, and don't do anything risky throughout the southwestern coast of Florida, because a major hurricane, category 3, category 4, is not something you want to mess around with. But like I said, the forecast is pretty certain at this point. A major hurricane will make landfall somewhere between Fort Myers and Tampa, and this will extend further northward as well, and could re-enter the Atlantic Ocean along the eastern coast of Florida, where it could maybe intensify a little bit just before making its final landfall, probably somewhere between Georgia and South Carolina, and that could bring another storm surge and tropical cyclone threat for the Carolinas and Georgia. So even further northward, you need to pay close attention to this. Now, taking a look at the future radar to really determine when you should expect the rain in certain areas of Florida. So I expect the rain to approach you guys right around the Tampa Bay area, I'd say by the early morning tomorrow, and the heavier rain should approach Fort Myers within the next few hours. And for Orlando, I expect the worst of the rain to happen a little bit later during the day on Wednesday, more so right around noontime on Wednesday. That's when we should see the thunderstorm activity continue to move northward, and we do see the eye continues to move northward, and I wouldn't say it makes landfall somewhere in the until the mid-afternoon on Wednesday, right between 2 and 5 o'clock, maybe right in between Tampa and Fort Myers. However, the storm has been trending a little bit further eastward, so we could see a direct landfall in Fort Myers if this trend were to continue. I think this Futurecast radar is putting the eye wall a little bit further northward than what I'm expecting. I'm expecting this storm to move a little bit closer to Fort Myers, a little bit further southward. So Fort Myers, you need to prepare as if a direct landfall as a major hurricane is going to impact you guys, because certainly that's looking like the trend at this point based on what the computer models and based on what the radar is stating at this time. And then you see that this storm is going to move very, very slowly and bring just very heavy rain pretty much throughout the Interstate 4 corridor, right between Orlando, Tampa, and up to Daytona Beach as well. This is where you should expect the worst of the rain, where you could receive easily over 20 inches of rain, and flash flooding is certainly likely at this point, almost guaranteed at this point, if you live anywhere near the Interstate 4 corridor of Florida. So you need to make sure to pay close attention to that. Even though if you might not be along the coast in Florida, you still are bound to receive major impacts when it comes to flooding and of course wind. That's going to be a major issue you're going to need to contend with in Florida. And taking a look at the forecasted wind. So if I were to move back towards the 28th, so this is the wind speed as of 11 a.m. tomorrow. We're beginning to see those 60 to 70 mile per hour sustained winds enter Fort Myers right around the morning time tomorrow, and we're starting to see the winds increase as well towards Tampa during the early morning on Wednesday. And if I were to continue to move forward, we continue to see that wind continue to increase as this eye continues to move northward. And then Fort Myers at this point by right around the mid-afternoon on Wednesday. This is right when the eye is at your doorstep. This is when you should expect the worst of the winds, where around Fort Myers, I'm expecting sustained winds around 60 to 70 miles per hour, and a little bit further northward, just north of the Fort Myers metropolitan area, I'm expecting sustained winds that could be close to 100 miles per hour right where this eye makes landfall, or a little bit over that. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw wind gusts over 130 to 140 miles per hour right along the eye wall. So you need to prepare. So if you live in the Fort Myers metropolitan area, you need to prepare as if a tornado is going to move through, because some of these winds associated with the eye wall of Hurricane Ian will be such significant enough that it will be equivalent to a tornado moving right through your neighborhood. So you need to prepare for extremely strong winds. And if I were to continue to move forward, this wind moves even further inland as this eye moves inland, where we see Tampa get associated with 50 mile per hour sustained winds. And then eventually we will, of course, see those strong winds enter the central portion of Florida, where Orlando, you could experience sustained winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour, not gusts, sustained winds of 50 to 60 miles per hour, with wind gusts, of course, over hurricane force possible around the Orlando metropolitan area. And this includes Daytona Beach as well. And even further northward, we're going to see a strong northeasterly flow that's going to bring not only strong winds along the coast, but high storm surge as a result of how large this fetch is, because we see these winds, northeasterly winds, extend from Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, moving all the way down to the Jacksonville area. So the storm surge should be quite strong and will only get worse as I continues to move further eastward. So that's something to keep in mind in terms of what the model intensity, the model track guidance is stating. Of course, the certainty is high at this point. This should make landfall just north or right around the Fort Myers metropolitan area. So the certainty is very high, not very at this point. So you need to take this seriously along the southwestern coast of Florida, because it's pretty much inevitable at this point you will experience major hurricane impacts. And then here's the rainfall forecast, where we do see extending from Tampa Bay as far north as Orlando and close to Jacksonville, Florida. You should expect 15 to 20 inches of rain, and in localized areas you could experience a little bit more than that, where you could experience up to, if not over, 2 feet of rain, which will inevitably cause a major flood threat and a major flash flood threat. So if you live in a flood prone area, you need to make sure to take the necessary precautions to stay safe from the major flood threat that's going to be associated with Hurricane Ian, because it's pretty much guaranteed at this point. This is going to be one of the worst flood threats in Florida history, I'd say, based on the rain totals we're going to see associated with Hurricane Ian. Now, a storm surge will be another major issue, especially if you live around Tampa and Fort Myers, where you could receive 8 to 12 feet of storm surge right along the coast, which is very significant and definitely will cause major damage if you live right along the coast, where the storm surge will be at its highest, where you could expect, if you're right along the coast, just south of Tampa Bay and right around the Fort Myers area, you should expect 8 to 12 feet of water inundation right along the coast, because storm surge is pretty much the amount of water you add on normally dry ground, where we're seeing 8 to 12 feet of storm surge right along the coast, right over normally dry ground. So that will be extremely significant and cause significant damage if you're right along the coast. And then you see right around Tampa Bay, you could expect anywhere from 4 to 6 to 3 to 5 feet, and 6 to 9 feet right around the Naples area, and even towards the northeastern coast of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina, you could expect some storm surge flooding as Hurricane Ian re-enters the Atlantic Ocean on the eastern side of Florida. So you need to take the necessary precautions if you live right along the coast, especially in Fort Myers, which likely will experience its worst storm surge its worst storm surge you'll experience in years. Now, taking a look at the wind field, we do see that the tropical storm force winds extend well beyond the center of circulation, and the hurricane force wind gusts as well extend well beyond the center of circulation. However, those hurricane sustained winds are primarily on the eastern side of the eye, so you need to pay close attention to that. If you're on the eastern side of the eye, you're more likely to experience hurricane force sustained winds. So in Fort Myers, while you might not get directly impacted by the eye, you still could easily experience sustained winds right around hurricane force thanks to how large a wind field is on the eastern side of the eye wall. Now, taking a look at my forecast when it comes to major Hurricane Ian, of course, the certainty is high. I'm expecting this to make landfall as a Category 4 around 140 miles per hour because I do expect this storm will undergo its eye wall replacement cycle and will be able to organize itself enough to where it will strengthen just a bit before landfall, even though it only has a couple hours before it does make landfall. And then, of course, it will weaken as it heads further northward, but this still will move very slowly, will bring heavy rain and strong winds for a long period of time for Florida, so that should make the impacts that much more significant. And then, of course, I'm expecting this to eventually weaken. I meant to put 30 miles per hour on Saturday night. I apologize for that. But even in the Carolinas and Georgia, you still need to prepare for tropical storm-like conditions. So make sure to take this seriously all throughout the Southeast, as my hearts go out to those affected by Hurricane Ian. And I hope you guys stay safe during this storm, because it's definitely going to be one of the worst storms you've experienced in years for the coast of Florida and even further northward into the Southeast. So make sure to stay safe, as I hope you guys are able to deal with this storm the best way possible. But anyways, guys, I thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see more weather content, and I hope you guys stay safe and have a good day.